Hey, Deserving listeners, a lot of you have been asking that I react to the therapy scenes that are in 13 Reasons Why Season 4. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor, and this is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. Let's get to the show.
When we first met all those years ago, you were having nightmares.
I've had panic attacks, or something like that, since the 4th grade. And I never told anyone, and now they're getting worse. And I guess that's why I'm here again.
So this is great. A lot of depictions of therapy, they always leave out this step, which is, why is the client in the therapy office to begin with? People in public, and I guess writers, will tend to create scenes in which therapy is taking place as a plot device and not as something that is trying to portray therapy accurately. For example, when you go to the physician, unless it's a regular checkup, you go there for a reason. You broke your arm, you are sick, you have a concerning mole that you're worried about. But somehow when it comes to therapy, when they depict it in movies and TV, it's as if therapy just happens to people. And that is not what therapy is. Now, therapy can be that way sometimes because some clients don't know why they're in therapy, or they're forced to be in therapy, or the therapist is too insecure or inexperienced to ask the question, what would you like me to do? But for under the best of circumstances, of which it's the most common, is unless the client, if the client doesn't say why they want to be in therapy, at least the therapist asks, okay, what would you like to get out of therapy? Or what would you like to get out of today? Or sometimes I'll ask, okay, we just talked about that for 35 minutes. There seems to be kind of a story arc to that we've wrapped up. For the next, number of minutes left in the session, what would you like to talk about? It's always generated from the client. Again, there are some circumstances where that isn't the case, but usually that is the case, where the client is in the driver's seat. The client is the one saying, therapist, please help me with this. And he just said what he would like help with, which is his nightmares and his anxiety. So we're already at a good start. I'm encouraged that at least the audience now knows why the client is in therapy, because then that gives me the ability to react to the therapist's behavior based on that goal.
To be more in control.
Control of?
Everything.
Does anyone have control of everything?
I guess, I need to be calm.
Do you have reasons not to be?
Yeah.
Such as?
So I like the style so far. It's not my style. It's a bit cold and not very collaborative in the beginning, but there's a certain Albert Ellis style that he's doing right now. He immediately challenges the notion of, like, is anyone really in control of everything? So your attachment, he's essentially giving the wisdom of being attached to trying to control everything might be the problem. The fact that we're never going to get you to a point where you're in control of everything. And so maybe releasing yourself of that pressure to control everything is the answer, rather than trying to control everything. So there's some, therapeutic wisdom to that style. And then he says that, I'm very stressed out. And he's like, well, do you have reasons to be stressed out? Which is another really wise question to ask. It's like, instead of saying, how can I cope, or how can I get over these feelings, a good therapeutic question is, well, maybe you have good reasons to be upset. And that's okay if you're struggling with a lot of difficulty. And I know that this character has been through a lot in seasons 1, 2, and 3. So maybe he'll get into that. So, it's normal to be stressed out given what he's been through in the past couple seasons.
School, friendships, and parents.
Are those things you feel the need to control?
Yes. No. I need to control myself.
Why? What happens if you can't control yourself?
So I'm very encouraged thus far. I have very low expectations for therapy being depicted in movies and TV, and it's usually terrible. So I'm actually very encouraged by what I'm seeing so far. The therapist seems non-judgmental, which most therapists are. The therapist has a very Socratic way of walking through the interventions, of asking questions. The therapist seems genuinely curious about things. There's some messages that I pointed out that the therapist seems to be saying in the moment, which aren't bad messages to say. And in therapy, there's a little bit more time for those to be explored. But I understand that, for a TV show, you got to be real economic with your time. But I'm very encouraged so far. I still expect things to go off the rails at some point, because 99% of the time they do, where the therapist has sex with a client, or the therapist stalks all their clients like in Gypsy, or the therapist yells at their client, or the therapist just is completely ineffective, or there's usually writers write therapists as just complete incompetent people. So we'll see what happens. Let's continue watching.
People might get hurt. I might let people down. When I lose control, it's not good. It's ugly.
You have to let go of the shit you can't control, or it will kill you. You have to make yourself forget. Am I helping you to forget?
So, full disclosure, as I've said before in previous audio episodes, I grew up with the writer of this show, Brian Yorkie. Him and I were friends growing up, and Liberty High, actually. So me and Brian Yorkie, the writer of the show, we went to Issaquah High, but Brian actually lived close to Liberty High School. So I guess he got it from that. Or maybe that's the name of because Brian adapted the book. He didn't write the book. He wrote the screenplays. And I believe he wrote season 4. I'm not sure. But the other part of this that Brian told a friend of mine is, because I haven't talked to Brian in a while, but a friend of mine is in contact with Brian, and Brian told my friend that the Asian football player is loosely based on me. Now, I know enough about the show to know that guy is not redeemable in a lot of ways and has a lot of bad behavior, but Brian told my friend that the character in the book, it wasn't clear what ethnicity he was. And Brian said, well, in my school, one of the big main jocks football players, captain of the football team, was my friend Kirk, who was Asian. So I'm going to make him Asian, because that's kind of not an expected move. Usually you have the white blonde guy as the captain of the football team. But Brian Yorkie was like, look, I know that other ethnicities are captain of the football team. Now, I'm going to try to be as unbiased as possible, and if I see things on this show that I don't like, that my friend wrote, then I'm going to call it out. But it is interesting to follow my friend Brian's career. He actually has a Tony Award for writing a musical called Next to Normal. It's about a family in which the mother has bipolar, and I actually was there as he was developing the script and saw the early forms of the play. He actually had performers perform a very rough draft of it in Issaquah, where we grew up. And he also wrote another renowned musical. He would work with a guy who wrote the music, and Brian Yorkie would write, whatever the other stuff. And he actually, Brian Yorkie, who's a white guy, wrote an excellent musical about the Asian American experience called Making Tracks, which is just amazing. I'm getting chills remembering this just amazing musical, especially the first half is just an amazing piece of art, really. And so Brian Yorkie is a very accomplished writer. I've been following him. He wrote a play in high school that was kind of like 13 Reasons Why. What was it called? It was called Leaders, I think. And friends of mine were in the play, and it was about high school kids. And so I think Brian Yorkie's always been interested in high school. Brian was very popular in high school. He was ASB president, and everyone knew him. He was a very larger-than-life kind of guy. We were actually in plays together. He was really into theater, and I was the jock who I actually was a singer, and so I would get kind of roped into being in plays and musicals for that reason, and I was a terrible actor. And there were scenes where me and him actually were in on stage, and I just knew that I was in good hands. And one time, the two of us were, right front and center stage. And it's always scary if you've been on theater before, to be right on the edge of the stage, right in front of the crowd, and all you just see is just a sea of people. It's kind of a nerve-wracking experience to be that vulnerable. And he was, in the play, he was the father, and I was the son who was dating his daughter. And I was like this renegade kid that the father, Brian Yorkie, didn't like very much. And he had his arm around me, and I was supposed to be all cool and collected and like, yeah, dude, whatever. And he's like, well, son, treat my daughter right, this kind of attitude. And right in the middle of our scene, a light, all the lights, the lighting, one of the lights dislodges from the rafters and falls right in between us and the audience. Like, ba-bam, and sparks are flying everywhere. And again, I'm not a theater person, so I don't know what to do. And I'm like, so do we just call off the play right now? Is that the end of the show? And Brian, total professional, he said the next line in the script, but he said it in a way that was so funny because it acknowledged the thing that happened. It was this brilliant improv moment, and the crowd just erupted into laughter. And it was just this amazing moment. And I was like, man, this guy knows theater. And I would have just been like, well, I guess that's the end of the show. Pull the curtains. Let's all go home because I don't know how to recover from this. The other thing to think as I'm saying this right now is who installed those lights? And if it was just a couple feet one way or the other, it would have brained us or someone in the audience anyway. But another detail, just before I move on, is Brian. So Brian, he was in theater, and I'm a musician, and I write music. And so he actually asked me to write a musical with him, and we actually started writing a musical together. But it was like close to college, and you run out of time, and you grow apart, and we never finished it. And we didn't even really get started. But that's my relationship with Brian as I watch this. And the reason why I'm telling you now is because I like to be honest with people. I could have left that out. I could have said like, well, people might get upset and worry that I'm biased, but I just want to be honest with you as listeners because you're all very kind to me, and so I want to be kind and respectful to you too. Anyway, let's get back to the show.
Why don't you know who you can trust?
Because it's high school.
It's a very non-specific answer from a very specific young man. Clay, we talked about this when you were in middle school. The body's incredibly intuitive. It will create all kinds of physical stimuli to force you to address a psychological problem. These things you're feeling, they're your mind telling you to pay attention.
So again, good. It's hard to know exactly what our body is telling us at any given moment. But it is a good thing to say. I say this to clients, not in these words, but the message is often important for people to hear that our emotions are important and our emotions manifest as bodily reactions. This was something that was pretty novel to me, pretty mind-blowing to me, that emotions begin as a physical reaction, and then we notice the physical reaction and it alerts us to the emotion that we're feeling, and then we have conscious awareness of the emotion. So if you're angry, You might get kind of tight. Your heart rate might go up. Your fight or flight system starts to get activated. Maybe you're clenching your hands. Maybe you're starting to talk fast. Maybe your eyes, your jaw's getting clenched. Or, it can be real micro. It's not like every time you're angry, you're like, it's little tiny little impulses that you have. And then when you notice that, you might not notice all the little micro muscles and nervous systems, but you just get a general vibe that you're angry. And you get hot. It feels something, and then you notice cognitively in your executive function or wherever our conscious mind is, and we notice, oh, I'm angry right now. Now, for some of us, because we're ashamed, or society teaches that we shouldn't do this, particularly for boys, because we teach boys that emotions are a weakness and that they're not supposed to be aware of their emotions, or they're not supposed to have emotions. And so for a lot of people, and boys in particular, they will, every step of the way, they'll be unaware of what's happening. They won't be aware of their bodily reaction. They won't be aware of the emotion that is used to describe those bodily reactions. They won't be even aware of the cognitive aspects of the emotion. They will only manifest the emotion and then say, what? I was just being normal, or I'm not angry right now, even though they're clearly angry in the moment. Not because they're lying, but because they just don't have any practice noticing what they're going through. I have worked with clients for years, getting them in touch with each layer of that, getting them in touch with what are the sort of sentences or vibes or thoughts that you have when you're having a particular emotion. What's the overall bodily, physical feeling of that emotion? What are the micro feelings that you have in various parts of your body? And so the therapist is generally trying to say that. Now, I think this is being used as a plot point so that the viewer, can be, because this is the first episode of season 4, be alerted to the fact that Clay has perhaps revelations that need to be explored. Because I believe season 3, there was a murder, spoiler alert, that we still don't know who was the perpetrator. And I think season 4, at least the beginning, is probably going to be about that question. And so I think the writer is using a therapist thingy to say to push that plot forward, which, that's what you do as a writer. You're trying to push a plot forward. You're not trying to portray therapy accurately. But the best shows that portray therapy, they both have a good story that compels you, and they write accurate therapy depictions. There's only out of the hundreds of depictions that I've seen, there's only a few that I would say are accurate. One is Ordinary People, which I might do a reaction video at some point. I know some of you have asked that. And the second is Good Will Hunting, of which there's a moment where the therapist, and I did a whole reaction video to that, where the therapist, played by Robin Williams, literally chokes Matt Damon, the client, which obviously is a massive problem. It's not only unethical, but it's illegal. It's an assault. But aside from that moment, the depiction was a particular kind of therapy. The therapist was very authentic and very real and very self-disclosing and very effective. So those are the only two. There's another example of couples therapy that isn't very extensive, but it's called Hope Springs. Meryl Streep is in that movie, and the therapist is played by Steve Carell, who plays Michael on The Office. And from my memory, that was actually a pretty good depiction of couples therapy. Aside from that, movies and TV are abysmal usually. Or another category is they depict therapy accurately, but they depict a bad version of therapy that sometimes is done, like the therapy that was in Big Little Lies. That therapy is kind of common, so it is sort of an accurate depiction of therapy, but it's a kind of therapy that I just cannot endorse. And maybe I'll do a whole reaction video to that, but I actually did an episode on that you can listen to. Something like the therapy depicted in Big Little Lies. You can listen to that whole episode. Anyway, let's get back to the show.
Have you Everyone keeps trying to put you in one box. And you fit, or you don't, or you pretend to. But any way you look at it, it's a fucking box. It's a fucking box. Like the box they'll bury you in.
Is that why you tanked the college tour? To get out of your box?
I didn't do it on purpose. Shit happened.
Just happened to you? Or did you make choices?
The other detail I like about this depiction is that the office is not too extravagant. A lot of times, therapy offices in movies and TV, the office will look like the furniture is thousands and thousands of dollars. This couch that the client is sitting on looks like a very typical therapist couch that probably didn't cost that much money and has probably seen a lot of wear and tear over the years. The lamp looks very conservative, the art on the wall, so I like that too. The carpet looks very typical, and my office has looked like, I've never had a table in between me and my client. I like to be closer and have that proximity to my clients for a variety of reasons. I also like to sit straight on with the therapist is sort of at an angle with the couch. There's different pros and cons to that. One is that with a table, some people will feel a little bit more comfortable. Obviously, the con is that you're not as intimate. If you're a little askew like that, you're at a little bit of an angle, it gives the client a chance to look straight ahead and not at you, so they can kind of free associate. So there's a pro to that, and then the con is that the therapy just feels not quite as close and intimate as. So every therapist has their own style, and there's choices you make, and maybe with different clients you have different styles with each client. So anyway, let's get back to the show.
I wasn't thinking about the specifics. I saw this hot girl and...
And what?
I was hard. And I didn't even realize it, and it was fucking freaking me out.
Why? Why did it freak you out?
I don't fucking know why. Aren't you supposed to tell me? Isn't that your job?
Is that what you think my job is?
Jesus fucking Christ, can you just...
Okay, so this is another style difference. There are certain therapists who will have this kind of style, and there's nothing wrong with it. There's pros and cons. It's not my style, which is to continue to throw back to the client. And when they ask you a question, you essentially evade it by putting it back on the client. And you're essentially giving the message of, we're not here to talk about me, and I'm not here to reassure you. I'm here to listen, and I'm here to ask questions. But the space that we're in right now, the space I'm creating with the style of my reactivity to you, is for you to be able to sit with yourself, explore yourself, get to know yourself, and learn to be okay with the fact that other people aren't necessarily going to make you feel better. So you have to figure out how to make yourself feel better. I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to put you down. I'm going to listen, and I'm going to be right there with you, but I'm not going to save you from your own trials and tribulations. And I'm also not going to take away the opportunity for you to tend to yourself and for you to stand in your own 2 feet. I'm not going to always be there to catch you, because I believe in you. I believe that you can do this on your own. Therapists don't say that, but they might. But that's the message that you're trying to give clients is that, the client is like, aren't you here to, make me feel better? And the therapist, well, let's watch that again.
About the specifics, I saw this hot girl and...
And what?
I was hard. And I didn't even realize it, and it was fucking freaking me out.
Why? Why did it freak you out?
I don't fucking know why. Aren't you supposed to tell me? Isn't that your job?
Is that what you think my job is?
Jesus fucking Christ, can you just tell me? I'm here because of the panic attacks and the intrusive thoughts and everything, and aren't you supposed to help me get rid of those?
So that's the style, and if you stick with it with compassion, the idea is that the client is given a chance to explore for themselves and stand on their own 2 feet, and not get so much involved in, hey, reassure me, validate me, make me feel better. Now, that's not my style. What I'd be doing with him, and there's pros and cons to my style as well, is he revealed something that he's really ashamed of, not because he was born ashamed of sexuality, but because he's been taught by society to be ashamed of it. His body had a reaction, and so I would use that opportunity to validate him by saying something like, I don't know exactly what I would say, but he's like, I don't know why I did that. It seemed kind of weird to me. And I might be like, okay, well, that happened. You don't have any control over your body, and let's explore that some more. What's good? There's nothing wrong with having an involuntary bodily reaction. Well, tell me more. I would really want to capitalize on that to prove to him that this is a safe place that he can explore things that he might feel too ashamed to explore with himself or even with other people. So there's pros and cons to the way I did it. There's pros and cons to the way this therapist did it. By the way, it just occurred to me I should probably have another disclaimer here in the first reaction video to this. Is, well, 2 things. One is that I'm not sure if I'm going to do more of these. It depends on the response on YouTube. I'm actually going to be experimenting with various different other shows, because usually when people ask me to react to something, I commit to it and I spend months watching that show. And so I'm not sure what I'm going to invest my time into. So if there's a big response to this, then I'll follow up with some more. It just depends on how things are going to go. I'm going to do some other shows as well, so watch out for that. But the other thing that I'll say is that the first season of 13 Reasons Why, when it came out, it was a big smash, right? It was a big hit. It was in the news. There was a lot of talk about it because it was really quite popular. And there was some concern about it from both parents and mental health professionals that it depicted suicide in a way that was, glorifying suicide. And when I watched the first season, I thought that the suicide was very graphic, or it was a while ago, so I don't really remember. I just remember thinking like, whoa, they really hit this thing hard with the suicide depiction, because the whole story is basically 13 reasons why I killed myself. And there was a lot of fear and a lot of negative talk and a lot of accusations. And at the time, I thought, well, yeah, maybe it's a problem, but really what we have in our society is we don't talk enough about suicide, and we need to talk more about it because there's so much stigma around it that people don't come forward for help when they are thinking about suicide. So I was saying that, well, overall, this is a good thing, because we rarely talk about it, and when it is talked about, it's ignored. So at least we're talking about it now, and that's a good thing. And whatever kind of bad outcomes that come from the show is probably not, it's probably the benefits outweigh the problems. However, we always have to look at the data. And so a year or two later, we were able to look back at the data, and what we found was in the month that the first season was put on Netflix and was popular, there was a significant bump in the number of suicides over those 2 months that was not indicative of that time of the year. And we don't know, and we'll never know, because those are hard things to study, but it looks like there's a good possibility that the show actually did push some individuals to complete suicide when they wouldn't have otherwise. I've studied suicide extensively, and in a nutshell, there are a lot of people with suicidal thoughts. And the research shows that the vast majority of people who attempt suicide and complete, if we can just get them through a difficult time where they're thinking about it more than other times, then almost always we can prevent them from dying. And a couple years down the line, if we get them the treatment that they need, and we get them the support that they need and the life that they need to feel safe and supported and loved, almost all the time, those individuals will look back and say, thank you so much for getting me through that time. Even though I really did want to kill myself, thank you so much for getting me through that time because my life is better now and I'm just really glad that I got through that time. Sometimes people will just have a spike in suicidality that will last for an hour and then they'll attempt, even though the previous hour they weren't really thinking about suicide. So intent can be very fleeting. And one of the things that can happen is that if you watch a show like this and you're susceptible to suicidal thoughts, watching a show like this, because the first season, basically the girl who kills herself, she essentially gets back at all the people who hurt her by leaving all these audio tapes, literal cassette tapes, of 13 Reasons Why, and every cassette tape is an indictment on another person that let her down. And what this glorifies is, ha ha ha, I'm going to be able to kill myself and it'll be revenge on all those other people who let me down, and I'm going to make them pay. And they all kind of did. They all felt terrible because she killed herself. So a functional way to communicate that is to not kill yourself and go to all those people and say, you let me down in person, and you don't have to kill yourself to emphasize that. And so it seems, given the data, that the show did actually motivate. Now, the show and my friend Brian Yorkie and the producer, what's her face? I can't remember her name. Gomez. She went out with Bieber 15 years ago. Anyway, I'm sure people are yelling at the TV screen right now. They all got a lot of flack for that. And what they decided to do was, at the beginning of every episode, they had this disclaimer and this message of, if you're thinking about suicide, make sure you reach out to these people. And I saw in season 4 that they're doing that as well. So that is more responsible. Seasons 2, 3, and 4 aren't really so much about suicide the way that season 1 was about. And by the way, if you're thinking about suicide, I implore you to get therapy. And I also will tell you that suicide is something that people feel for a short amount of time. And if you can get through that time, you'll almost always feel better. I've treated a lot of people with intense suicidal intentions, and you deserve to live. And it might not seem like it at the moment, but there is a path forward. There is hope. And you just got to get through those dark days. And once you get through, everyone I've treated and everyone I've talked to and everyone I know and every story I've ever heard from everyone always says, I'm so glad that I got through that time. And I'm so glad that I valued myself enough to reach out, to ask for someone to hang out with me, to get therapy, to get a safety plan in place. So do not isolate. That is the key. And make sure you have a therapist to help you. There are so many reasons why people will think about suicide. Childhood mistreatment, current mistreatment, shame, isolation. Life can be tough. There can be a lot of suffering. And when we feel trapped, that thought sometimes enters our mind. But that isn't the solution. The solution is get a therapist, get support, get people around you and say, okay, how are we going to actually solve this problem? Let's try some things out. Let's give it a few years and see if I can actually get my life in a direction that I actually feel like my hands are on the wheel and I'm excited to get up in the day. It's sometimes hard to imagine that when you're in that state, but everyone I've worked with has gotten through that time. I've never had a client who actually has completed suicide. I've had clients attempt, and so I'm telling you that it gets better. You just have to hold on and get those people around you. You deserve to have people around you. That's usually the key that I would find for people who are thinking about suicide is they often feel like they're a burden to other people. They're just like, I don't want to burden other people. You're not a burden. No one thinks of you as a burden. That is something in your head that your neurochemicals or your mistreatment in your past, there's some message that is in error that you are a burden to other people. You are not a burden. Every time I have heard someone say, I'm a burden, we investigate it. We even ask people in their lives. no one says that that person is a burden. Nobody. Usually the people who believe they're a burden are the least burdensome people on the planet because they're so avoidant of like being a burden that they're like invisible to other people. And so you deserve to take up space. So make sure you do that. And obviously go to the suicide hotline, which is, her name is Selena Gomez. The hotline is 1-800-273-8255. Just Google National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. You can actually chat over text with people as well. It's completely anonymous. And you can talk for a long time. You can just be like, I'm just kind of thinking about suicide. I don't think I'm going to do it today, but I really just want to talk to someone. Call the line, talk to someone for 2 hours. There are volunteers and professionals just waiting for you to call. So please do that. Again, just Google National Suicide Prevention Lifeline.
This is the work. These are the questions we ask.
I just wanted to get better.
It can. It will. But it's not instant, and it's not a straight line. And it may well get worse before it gets better.
Okay, so again, not a terrible thing to say. I don't know if I would say that because it's hard to know that for sure. But it's not unusual for a therapist to say that. In fact, a lot of people will have that very statement in their disclosure statement. The statement that they give to clients in the beginning of therapy is, sometimes therapy can be tough and sometimes it'll get worse before it gets better. So just because things are getting worse doesn't necessarily mean that therapy is failing. And so that's right down the middle, very common thing that therapists will say, particularly in the beginning of a new course of therapy. And because Brian Yorkie is a good writer, I don't know if he wrote this season, he's the creator of the show, but it is also a plot point where it's telling the audience of this might get worse before it gets better in this season. So
I think it's brave.
all right, well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Thanks for joining me out there. Let me know what you think in the comments, and please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.